I've always been the kind of person who keeps her head down and handles what needs to be handled. Between my job at the clinic, paying the bills on time, and making sure my little apartment stays in some kind of order, most days just feel like a list I quietly move through. It isn't glamorous, but it's mine, and it's stable. My relationship with my father has never been stable, not in the loud, explosive way people imagine, but in the small, uneven ways that add up over years. He'd show up for my brother's games and stay the whole time. For mine, he'd come late or leave early, always with a reason that sounded practical enough to let slide. I learned early not to expect much, and I built my life around taking care of myself. These past few years, though, things shifted more. He started calling when he needed help, car trouble, paperwork, little emergencies. I'd tell myself it wasn't a big deal, that I was just being kind, that it meant something that he came to me. But each time, after I solved the problem for him, there was this quiet space inside me that felt a little more tired. When my brother announced his wedding, I tried to stay hopeful. I showed up for dress fittings, tastings, all the small planning moments I got invited to. I kept my expectations low, which is the only way I know how to deal with family gatherings. Still, I felt something tightening as the day got closer. A few comments, a few glances, a few moments where I felt like an afterthought again. By the time I walked into the wedding venue, I could feel the old imbalance settling right back where it always lived. I just didn't expect it to show itself so clearly, in front of everyone, with the words I heard next. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me something. What time is it where you are right now, and where in the world are you listening from? Most mornings start the same for me, and I think that's why they feel comforting. I wake up before my alarm because the building settles loudly around that time. I make coffee in the small machine I've had for years and stand by the window while it brews, watching the parking lot fill one car at a time. That routine steadies me before work, especially on days when I know the clinic will be busy. At the clinic, I usually handle the front desk for the first half of the morning. Appointment reminders, rescheduling, checking insurance cards that people forget they switched. It's not glamorous, but I've gotten good at reading faces and voices. I can tell when someone is nervous about results or just hasn't slept well. Sometimes I talk a patient through a form slowly just so they have a moment to breathe. It's small, but it feels like something useful. Between calls, I keep a notepad where I track my own expenses. Rent, utilities, groceries, student loan. I jot down anything that changes, even small things. It's a habit I picked up out of necessity after years of knowing no one else was going to catch my mistakes. That little pad stays in my bag everywhere I go, and touching it calms me. It's strange, because my father never needed reminders, not for things that mattered to him anyway. Growing up, he remembered every one of my brother's tournaments. He'd leave work early, take pictures, bring him out for food afterward. For me, things were quieter. He'd tell me he'd try to make my school events, but something always came up. Traffic, a deadline, a phone call. I got used to glancing at the door and knowing he wouldn't walk in. Even as adults, the pattern stayed. A month ago, he called me to help him sort out an issue with his insurance. No small talk. No, "How are you?" Just the problem and the assumption I'd fix it. I did, because that's what I do. But I hung up feeling that old heaviness in my chest. The kind that shows up when history repeats itself. When my brother announced his wedding date, I told myself I should be excited. I tried to picture the family gathered, laughing, celebrating. But beneath that, I felt something tight. Not dread exactly, just a quiet worry that I'd slip right back into that familiar role. Useful, but not important. The group chat didn't help. Messages would come in about flowers or food tastings, and sometimes I'd respond with a suggestion. Hours later, I'd see a flurry of replies between everyone else, as if I hadn't said anything. Once, I asked what the dress code was for the rehearsal dinner. My brother's fiancé responded politely, but my father just sent a thumbs up emoji. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to figure out if it meant anything or nothing at all. One evening after work, he called. The conversation felt stiff from the start. He asked if I'd figured out my schedule for the wedding weekend, and I said I had. He sounded distracted, like he wasn't fully listening. Then he mentioned how everyone else had already arranged carpools and hotel rooms. The way he said everyone else sat strangely with me. I told him I'd manage my own arrangements, and there was a pause long enough for me to wonder if he regretted calling. Then he said, "All right then," and the line went quiet. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to sort through what exactly bothered me. It wasn't the lack of warmth. I stopped expecting that a long time ago. It was the feeling that I was always just outside the frame, included in name but not in presence. I thought maybe I was reading too much into things, so I tried to shake it off. I made myself a simple dinner and cleaned the kitchen even though it wasn't dirty. Sometimes movement helps me settle my mind, but as the wedding got closer, small things kept piling. My brother sent out a photo of the venue layout, tagging our father and a few cousins. I was left off, then added hours later with a brief, "Oops." Nobody meant it to hurt, I'm sure. These things rarely come from malice. They come from habit. Still, I found myself hoping maybe this time would feel different. Maybe I'd walk in and not feel overshadowed or overlooked. I held on to that thought even though a quieter part of me reminded me that hope has disappointed me before. I tried to focus on work and my routines, keeping my days predictable. But every time a new message popped up about the wedding, I felt that small shift inside me again. A mix of anticipation and caution, sitting right next to each other, neither one strong enough to take over. I kept telling myself to stay calm, stay open, and give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I just didn't know then how quickly all of that would change once the day arrived. The first pre-wedding event was a small gathering at my brother's fiancé's parents' house. Nothing formal, just snacks and planning, but everyone treated it like something you had to show up polished for. I got there a few minutes early, hoping the extra time would help me ease into things, but the living room was already full. People had formed little clusters, laughing, comparing schedules, talking over each other. I stepped inside quietly, holding a small container of the cookies I'd baked that morning. Her mother smiled politely and took them from me. "We have plenty," she said, setting them aside on a crowded counter without really looking. I nodded, trying not to read anything into it. I noticed my brother across the room. He was animated, gesturing about something on his phone while our father stood beside him, listening with that focused look he rarely used around me. I lifted a hand slightly, just enough to signal I was there. My brother waved without breaking conversation. My father didn't see me. Or maybe he did, and didn't think a reaction was necessary. I took a seat along the edge of the couch, choosing a spot that wouldn't force anyone to move. People kept squeezing in, shifting around, talking over my head as if I were part of the furniture. I tried to join in at one point. Someone was discussing centerpiece ideas, and I offered a simple suggestion about using candles to avoid clutter. No one responded. The conversation rolled on like I hadn't spoken. I let my hands fold in my lap and reminded myself not to take it personally. A little later, when they started dividing tasks, I stood and walked to the dining table where a few lists were spread out. "If you need help with anything small," I said, "I can take something on. Maybe the name cards or—" My brother's fiancé cut in gently, smiling in a way that felt more hurried than warm. "Oh, I think we're good on those. My cousin's already volunteered." Her tone wasn't unkind, but it closed the door firmly. I stepped back, feeling that quiet pinch behind my ribs. I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe they were trying to be efficient. When I returned to the couch, The only open spot left was near the hallway. From there, I could hear pieces of my brother's laughter mixed with our father's deeper voice. Something about how everyone's been such a big help. A few people agreed loudly. No one looked toward me. I stayed for another hour, mostly observing. I smiled when it seemed appropriate, nodded when someone made eye contact. But I felt like I was floating just outside the group, trying to step in but not finding a place to land. A week later, we had the rehearsal dinner. I arrived on time, maybe even a few minutes early, because the restaurant was close to my apartment. The hostess checked the reservation and led me to the back room. When I stepped inside, I saw the long table with name cards lined up neatly. My eyes scanned the settings. I found mine at the far end, separated by 2 seats from the next person. It wasn't isolated, but it wasn't close enough to be part of the main cluster either. I sat down, smoothing the napkin onto my lap. As people trickled in, they filled the seats in the middle first, chatting easily. Someone placed their bag on the chair next to mine, then later moved it and took the chair on the other side instead. A small thing, but I felt the shift. My father walked in and joined a group near the center. He looked relaxed, comfortable, tapping my brother on the shoulder as he talked. When he finally noticed me, he gave a quick nod from across the room. It was the kind of acknowledgement you give someone at a grocery store, not your daughter at a family event. When he eventually made his way toward me, he paused beside my chair. "Oh," he said, glancing at the name cards. "They've got you all the way down here." His tone was casual, but something in it landed sharp, like he was surprised but not enough to do anything about it. I forced a small smile. "It's fine." "Yeah," he said, already looking over his shoulder at someone calling his name. "Just enjoy the food." Then he walked back to the center of the room where the laughter was easiest. I stared down at the water glass in front of me, tracing a finger along the rim. I kept telling myself I was being too sensitive, that seating arrangements didn't mean anything. But the truth was, the distance felt familiar. Too familiar. When the plates arrived, conversation drifted around me but not toward me. I didn't mind eating quietly, but I couldn't ignore the growing disconnect. At one point, my cousin Melissa leaned over from 3 seats away and said, "Your dress is pretty." Her smile was soft, almost apologetic, like she could sense the mood around me but didn't know what to do. "Thanks," I said, appreciating the effort more than the compliment. I thought things might loosen up once we moved into the open area near the bar, but the pattern stayed the same. Groups formed quickly, leaving me on the edges. I tried joining one conversation about childhood stories. Someone mentioned a camping trip we all went on when we were kids. My father jumped in with a detailed memory about my brother catching a fish. People laughed. I added quietly, "I remember that trip. I got stung by a bee near the fire pit." My father glanced at me briefly. He said, then turned back to the group. "Anyway, the fish was huge." That stayed with me longer than it should have. It wasn't rude, it wasn't harsh. It was dismissive in that soft, familiar way that leaves you unsure if you're overreacting. On the drive home, I kept replaying small moments, the way people looked past me, the polite nods, the casual tone my father used, like I was an acquaintance. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe everyone was stressed. Maybe they didn't mean anything by it. Weddings bring out strange behaviors. I tried to be generous in my thinking, but I couldn't shake the feeling in my stomach. 2 days later, there was a final meeting at the venue, mostly logistics. I showed up ready to help, hoping maybe this would be smoother. When I walked in, my father was already speaking with the coordinator. I approached, but before I reached them, he said something that made me pause. He told the coordinator, "We've got everything handled. She's just here to watch." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't seem to realize I was close enough to hear, The coordinator smiled at me politely, unsure how to respond. I forced a nod and stepped back, pretending I needed to check something in my purse. My chest felt tight, like I needed a moment to steady myself. I stayed quiet for most of the walkthrough, staying out of people's way. No one asked for my input. When decisions were being made, I stood slightly apart, hands clasped. A few relatives gave me sympathetic half-smiles, the kind that say they noticed but weren't going to step in. I couldn't blame them. Family dynamics are complicated, and no one wants to disrupt a wedding plan. Still, the lack of support settled heavily on me. By the end of the walkthrough, I felt drained in a way that didn't match the amount of time we'd spent there. It wasn't exhaustion exactly. It was the slow accumulation of being overlooked in a dozen small ways. On my way out, I stopped in the hallway to take a breath. My father walked past me, talking with one of my uncles, not even glancing in my direction. I stood still until their voices faded. Driving home, I kept both hands tight on the wheel, focusing on the road. I didn't cry or even feel close to it. It was more like a quiet shift inside me. Something subtle but undeniable. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to not jump to conclusions, to focus on the wedding and nothing else. But the closer the day got, the more I felt that tension building. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady and persistent. Like a weight I kept adjusting without ever setting down. The morning before the wedding, I drove to the venue to drop off a small gift I'd bought for my brother and his fiancée. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a framed photo I knew they liked and hadn't printed yet. I thought it might be a quiet way to show support without getting in anyone's way. The venue was mostly empty when I arrived. A few staff members were setting up chairs. I walked toward the back hallway looking for someone to hand the gift to. As I rounded the corner, I heard my father's voice. I didn't mean to listen. I froze because I recognized his tone, the practical, clipped one he used when he was trying to manage something. He was talking to my uncle. "She doesn't need to be involved in every little thing," my father said. "It's better if she just stays out of the logistics." My uncle murmured something I couldn't hear clearly. My father continued, "She's good for the stuff I actually need help with. Paperwork, bills, that sort of thing. But these events, she'll only make it complicated." I felt the air shift around me, not dramatically, more like a quiet sinking. I took half a step back, hoping the floor wouldn't creak. My uncle said something about family, light and diplomatic, but my father cut him off. "Look, she's reliable. I'm not saying she's not, but she gets sensitive. And I don't have time to manage that right now. This is about the wedding." I stood there with the gift bag in my hand, staring at the little ribbon I'd tied around the handle. My first instinct was to pretend I hadn't heard, to slip out, make some noise, and come back in like I had just arrived. But my feet stayed planted. I listened because part of me needed to hear the rest. "She helps when I'm stuck," my father said. "That's enough. She doesn't need to be front and center." My uncle didn't respond. Or maybe he did, and I just didn't catch it because something inside me finally clicked into place, quietly, like a puzzle piece that had been hovering for years. The practical calls, the rushed conversations, the lack of presence, the seating arrangement, the brushing off, all of it lined up in my mind with an uncomfortable clarity. I wasn't someone he showed up for. I was someone he used when it was convenient. I backed away softly, making sure my shoes didn't scrape the floor. I walked out through a side door and breathed in the cool air. My heartbeat wasn't fast. It was steady, almost too steady, like my body had accepted something before my mind caught up. I sat in my car for a minute, the gift bag on the passenger seat. I rested my hand on it, feeling the smooth handle under my fingers. I thought about taking it inside anyway, but something felt different now, like the gesture wasn't necessary anymore. Instead, I just sat there and let the realization settle. It didn't come with anger or dramatic sadness. It was more like recognizing that I'd been holding up one end of something for so long that I never noticed the other end wasn't being held at all. I drove home without turning on the radio. When I got inside, I set the gift on the dining table and made myself tea. I stood at the counter while it steeped, staring at the steam rising in thin lines. My hands were calm, my breathing was even, but inside, something was shifting. Slow, steady, undeniable. I thought back to all the times I'd stepped in without being asked. The documents I'd filed, the errands I'd run, the emergencies I'd solved. I used to tell myself I did those things because I cared, and I did, but I couldn't ignore how transactional it suddenly looked when placed against his words. It was a strange feeling, seeing the truth so plainly. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't surprised. I was simply done carrying the weight without naming it. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from my cousin Melissa. "Are you okay?" I hesitated. She must have seen my face at one of the gatherings, or maybe she'd noticed more than she let on. I typed back, "I'm fine, just tired." She responded quickly, "If you need anything tomorrow, let me know." I mean that. I stared at her message for a while. It didn't solve anything, but it warmed a small part of me to know someone had been paying attention. Still, I felt a quiet certainty that whatever was coming next, I needed to handle it myself. That night, I laid out my dress for the wedding. I smoothed the fabric with my hand, noticing a tiny loose thread near the seam. I trimmed it carefully. I wanted everything to look clean and simple, not for anyone else, but for myself. As I prepared my small clutch for the next day, I thought about the repeated pattern I'd lived with. The reaching, the waiting, the hoping for my father to see me the way he saw my brother. And for the first time, there was no urge to try again. No thought of fixing anything. Just a clear understanding that I needed distance to protect the parts of me that were still tender. It wasn't a dramatic realization. It wasn't loud. It was a soft, internal shift that felt stronger than anything sharp or angry could have been. When I finally went to bed, I lay there in the dark, thinking about the wedding. I didn't picture the ceremony or the decorations. I pictured myself walking in with calm steps, not seeking anything, not waiting for permission to belong. There was tension in my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The quiet, steady kind that comes when you already know the truth but haven't yet acted on it. And with that feeling, I drifted into a light, restless sleep, knowing the next day would bring something I couldn't fully predict but could finally face without looking for approval that had never been there. I arrived at the venue a little early, hoping to ease into the day before the crowd settled in. The parking lot was already filling, though, and people were streaming toward the entrance in small groups. I sat in my car for a moment, smoothing my dress across my lap and taking one steady breath before stepping out. Wasn't nervous, exactly. Just aware of where I stood in this family and how careful I needed to be with my expectations. Inside, music played softly, and guests milled around near the bar. I recognized a few relatives and offered small, polite smiles. Most smiled back in that general way people do when they're in a rush to greet someone else. I found a quiet spot near the wall and watched the room fill. My brother looked genuinely happy. He and his fiancée moved from person to person, thanking everyone for coming. When they reached me, she hugged me lightly, and he said, "Glad you made it." It was warm enough, not overly personal, but warm. I held on to that. I hadn't seen my father yet. I tried not to focus on it, but my eyes kept drifting toward the door. When he finally walked in, he looked put together, suit pressed, tie neatly done. He greeted a few cousins loudly, laughing in that familiar, booming way he used around people he wanted to impress. I stood a little straighter, not expecting anything big. Just a nod, maybe. Some sort of acknowledgement. He didn't look my way. Not once. I told myself it was fine. People get distracted. Weddings are chaotic. I adjusted the strap of my bag and kept my attention on the ceremony space being prepared at the front. A few minutes later, one of the ushers approached and kindly told guests to take their seats. I followed the flow, choosing a spot in the middle section. I had just sat down when my father appeared at the end of the aisle, speaking quietly with someone on the staff. When his eyes finally swept past me, his expression tightened in a way I couldn't place. He walked toward my row with quick, purposeful steps. "Hey," he said, his voice low but firm. "What are you doing here?" I blinked. "Sitting," I said quietly. "They're starting soon." His jaw went tight. "No. I mean, why are you here right now? In this section?" I looked around. People were finding their seats. Nothing seemed out of place. "This is where everyone is sitting." He shook his head as if I'd missed something obvious. "You weren't supposed to sit here. You're supposed to just go somewhere else for now." The confusion hit first, a small, disorienting wave. I didn't know there was a specific place I needed to be. He glanced around, noticing people starting to look. That embarrassed irritation crossed his face. The same look from my childhood when he wanted me invisible. His voice sharpened. "Leave now. You're not wanted here." The room didn't go silent, not completely, but people turned. Some froze mid-step. Others paused with the kind of awkward stillness that says they didn't mean to witness anything but couldn't look away. Heat crept up the back of my neck. My hands felt suddenly, painfully visible. I wasn't sure what expression I was supposed to make or what reaction would make this less humiliating. I swallowed once, steadying myself. "All right," I said softly. "I'm going." A few relatives exchanged glances, wide eyes, small frowns. My cousin Melissa opened her mouth like she wanted to intervene, but her mother touched her arm lightly, stopping her. No one said anything aloud. The silence around me felt heavier than the outburst itself. I stood slowly, smoothing the skirt of my dress out of habit. I didn't look at my father again. I didn't want to see whatever expression he was wearing now, whether it was anger or embarrassment or nothing at all. As I walked toward the exit, someone murmured, "That wasn't necessary." I couldn't tell who said it. I kept moving, staying focused on the rhythm of my steps, one after the other, until I reached the hallway. Only when I stepped outside into the brightness did my shoulders unclench. I didn't look back. I didn't feel the need to. The drive home was quiet. My hands were steady on the wheel, but I felt emptied out, like something inside me had finally hit a limit I didn't know existed. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was just done. When I got home, I changed clothes immediately. The dress felt too tight, too tied to the moment. I folded it carefully and set it on the bed, then sat down on the floor with my back against the wall. The room felt still in a way that made everything sharper. I replayed the moment again, not to punish myself, but to understand. His tone, his urgency, the way he looked at me like I was a problem he needed to eliminate quickly. And just beneath all of that, the clarity I'd been inching toward for weeks finally settled into place. He didn't want me there because he didn't want to deal with me. Not my feelings, not my presence, not the history between us. He wanted simplicity, and he believed that meant pushing me out of the frame. Oddly, that realization felt strangely grounding. Painful, yes, but grounding. It gave shape to years of confusion. It explained the distance, the tone, the pattern. I sat there for a long time, letting the room stay quiet around me. The next morning, my phone rang around 9. I saw his name on the screen and felt my stomach tighten, not with fear, but with a kind of tired anticipation. I let it ring once more before answering. Hello? He cleared his throat. Hey, listen, about yesterday, things were hectic. You know how weddings are. I didn't say anything. Silence made him slightly uneasy. I could hear it in the shift of his breathing. Anyway, he continued, I need you to handle the mortgage payment today. It slipped my mind with everything going on, and it's due. There it was. Not an apology, not an explanation, just the same expectation that I would be useful, that I would help him because that's what I'd always done. I felt something inside me settle into a calm firmness I'd never felt before. I'm not doing that, I said. There was a pause. What? What do you mean you're not doing it? I spoke slowly, clearly. You're on your own now. The line went quiet for a moment, like he was processing words that didn't fit his version of reality. What's that supposed to mean? He finally asked, irritation creeping into his tone. You can't just drop responsibility like this. It was never my responsibility, I said. I helped because I chose to. I'm choosing not to anymore. He let out a sharp breath. So this is about yesterday? You're being dramatic. You know I didn't mean anything by it. You always take things the wrong way. I felt my jaw tighten slightly, but my voice stayed level. I heard what you said, all of it, a beat. What are you talking about? I was at the venue yesterday morning, I said. I heard you tell Uncle Dan that I make things complicated, that I only need to be around when you need something from me. He didn't deny it immediately. That told me more than anything. That was taken out of context, he finally muttered. I heard it clearly, I said. He shifted again, voice dropping into a frustrated whisper. You're really blowing this out of proportion. I have a lot on my plate. I shouldn't have to deal with this, too. I'm not asking you to, I said. That's the point. Silence stretched between us. Not the comfortable kind. More like he'd realized something slipped out of his control and didn't know how to pull it back. So you're just cutting me off? He asked. I'm setting boundaries, I said. You'll be okay. Another pause. Then, quieter, almost resentful. People are already asking why you left yesterday. They'll figure it out, I said. Or they won't. It's not my problem anymore. I could almost picture him sitting there, trying to decide if he should be angry or guilty or dismissive. I didn't wait for him to choose. I need to go, I said. He didn't stop me. I hung up, set the phone on the table, and let out a slow breath. My hands were steady again, steady in a new way, not numb but certain. Over the next few hours, my phone buzzed with a few messages. Melissa sent a simple, I'm here if you need anything. An aunt texted, Did something happen yesterday? People are talking. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to let the shift settle. By late afternoon, I felt the weight of the previous day differently, not as a bruise, but as a boundary, one I'd built and finally stepped behind. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and necessary, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on my own side. The weeks after the wedding felt strangely quiet, not in a peaceful way at first, more like the silence after a loud noise when your ears are still adjusting. I went to work, came home, cooked simple meals, and tried to get used to the absence of that constant sense of responsibility I'd carried for so long. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a small flicker of tension, expecting his name. It took a while for that reflex to fade. At the clinic, My coworkers could tell something was different. I wasn't distracted exactly, but I was moving a bit slower, thinking a little more before answering questions. One morning, during a break, I sat in the staff room stirring a cup of tea long after it had cooled. One of the nurses glanced at me and asked quietly, "Are you all right?" I gave a small nod. "I will be," I said, and that felt true in a way I hadn't expected yet. At home, the adjustment continued. My evenings were suddenly open. I didn't have to check whether a bill was due for him or if he needed something handled. There was no mental checklist running in the background. Instead, there was space. It was unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Sometimes I'd sit on the couch after dinner with the lamp on and just let myself be still. No multitasking, no waiting for another obligation to pop up. Just breathing. Family reactions came in slowly, like ripples. Melissa texted me a few times, each message gentle and brief. "Thinking of you. Hope today was okay." I appreciated them more than I said. An aunt called once, speaking in a careful tone, dancing around the subject without naming it. "Your father seems stressed," she said. I didn't engage. I just told her I hoped the newlyweds were enjoying their honeymoon and kept the conversation short. A couple of other relatives seemed to pull back, avoiding eye contact at a family lunch or sending messages that felt overly formal. I didn't take it personally. People pick sides in quiet ways sometimes, even when they don't mean to. I let their distance be their choice. For once, I didn't try to mend anything. A week after the confrontation, my father sent a text. It was short. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I set the phone down and continued washing the dishes. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood I didn't owe him immediate access to me. Or access at all, if it cost me my peace. Saying no, even in silence, felt unfamiliar. It also felt steady. On a Sunday afternoon, I met Melissa for coffee. She didn't pry. We sat by the window watching people walk by, and she eventually said, "I saw how he talked to you. I just didn't know what to do." Her voice was soft, like she was worried I'd think she'd abandon me. "You don't have to explain," I said. "I understand." And I did. No one wants to escalate conflict at a wedding. She nodded, relief showing in her eyes. For a moment, I felt less alone. After that, I started making small changes to my own life. I created a weekly plan for my expenses, but only mine. I finally fixed the loose drawer handle in my kitchen, something I'd been putting off for months. I signed up for an evening class I'd always been curious about, something unrelated to work or family expectations. Each step felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd been giving away. The emotional heaviness didn't disappear overnight. Some days felt lighter. Others were thick with old memories and habits trying to pull me back. But gradually, the sharp edges softened. I stopped replaying the outburst. I stopped questioning whether I should have stayed or argued or defended myself. I settled into the understanding that walking out quietly had been the only choice that aligned with who I wanted to be. One night, about 3 weeks after the wedding, I stood in my kitchen making dinner. The room was warm, the stove humming softly. I turned off the burner, and as I plated the food, a simple realization came over me. Not dramatic, not life-changing, just clear. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for his approval, not for his attention, not for things to be different than they were. I could care about him from a distance. I could wish him well without giving up parts of myself to make his life easier. I sat at the table with my meal and felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was more like finally standing somewhere solid after years of shifting ground. The change hurt. It still did. But it was necessary, and it was mine to make. By the end of that night, As I washed the plate and set it on the drying rack, I realized something simple but powerful. I could build a life where I wasn't an afterthought. I could choose people who treated me with care, including myself. And for the first time, that felt like enough. And if you want to keep following these stories, I post new ones every day. So just hit subscribe and stay with me. I'd really like to have you here for the next one.